When Robert left me at the pharmacy during my third round of chemo, I was already weak from the treatments, but he said I was being dramatic for attention, that I milked every little inconvenience. His sister Esther nodded in agreement as they drove away, leaving me collapsed on the sidewalk, unable to stand. My oncologist, Dr. Martinez, and the entire cancer center team arrived 30 minutes later, and Robert's face when he saw them will haunt him forever. The fluorescent lights in Henderson's pharmacy felt like ice picks stabbing through my skull. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I gripped the edge of the prescription counter, my knuckles white against the fake marble surface, trying to keep myself upright while the pharmacist explained why my anti-nausea medication would be delayed another 2 hours. The words floated around me like they were underwater. Insurance approval, prior authorization, call your doctor's office. I can't wait 2 hours, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pharmacy's beeping machines and shuffling customers. I just finished chemo this morning. I need the Zofran now or I'll be sick for days. The pharmacist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, looked genuinely sympathetic. I understand, honey. Let me see what I can do. Maybe we can give you a 3-day supply while we sort out the authorization. But Robert was already sighing behind me, that exaggerated sound he'd perfected over the past 6 months since my diagnosis. The sound that meant I was being unreasonable, demanding, making a scene over nothing. I turned to look at him, standing near the greeting card display with his arms crossed, checking his watch like I was personally responsible for ruining his entire day. Delilah, seriously, he said, loud enough for other customers to hear. It's just nausea. People get carsick and they don't collapse dramatically in public places. The pharmacist's expression shifted slightly. That careful neutrality healthcare workers develop when they witness something that makes them uncomfortable, but can't directly intervene. I felt heat crawl up my neck, embarrassment mixing with the bone-deep exhaustion that had become my constant companion. Robert, please, I managed. Dr. Martinez said the nausea from this protocol can be severe. You heard her explain? Dr. Martinez says a lot of things, he interrupted, his voice carrying that edge I'd learned to fear. Doesn't mean you have to perform every single symptom like you're auditioning for a medical drama. His sister Esther, who had insisted on coming with us today to help, stepped closer to Robert's side. She was perfectly put together as always. Her blonde hair styled in that effortless way that actually required an hour and expensive products. Her designer athleisure outfit carefully coordinated. Everything about her screamed health and vitality, a stark contrast to my hollow cheeks and the knit cap covering my bald scalp. Honestly, Delilah, Esther said, her tone dripping with concern that didn't reach her eyes, I know this is hard, but you've gotten so intense about every little thing lately. Maybe you need to focus on staying positive instead of catastrophizing every minor discomfort. The words hit me like a physical blow. Minor discomfort. 6 months of chemotherapy, of poison pumped through my veins every 3 weeks, of watching my body transform into something I didn't recognize, and she called it minor discomfort. I must have swayed because the pharmacist quickly placed a chair behind me. Ma'am, please sit down. You look very pale. See? Robert's voice carried triumph now, as if my need to sit proved his point. Always dramatic, always needs to be the center of attention. The pharmacy had grown quieter around us. Other customers pretended to study vitamin bottles while obviously listening to our conversation. An elderly man picking up heart medication kept glancing over with concern. A young mother with a crying baby looked torn between wanting to help and not wanting to get involved in what was clearly a family dispute. I'll call your oncologist's office, the pharmacist said quietly to me. Sometimes they can authorize an emergency supply. Don't bother, Robert said, stepping forward. She'll survive a few hours without her special pills. People all over the world deal with nausea without acting like they're dying. That's when the first wave hit me. The nausea from carboplatin and Taxol isn't like anything most people experience. It's not the gentle queasiness of flu or motion sickness. It's violent and consuming, like your body is trying to turn itself inside out while simultaneously being hit by a truck. I barely made it to the trash can near the pharmacy counter before my stomach emptied itself of the few crackers I'd managed to eat that morning. The sound echoed through the small space, harsh and raw. Other customers stepped back, some with disgust, others with sympathy. The pharmacist immediately appeared with paper towels and a bottle of water. "That's it," Robert announced to the entire pharmacy. "I'm not standing here while she makes a spectacle. Esther, we're leaving." "What?" I looked up from the trash can, wiping my mouth with shaking hands. "Robert, I can barely stand. How am I supposed to get home?" "Call an Uber," he said, already, heading toward the automatic doors. "Or walk. The fresh air might do you good instead of wallowing in self-pity." "Robert, wait." But he was already pushing through the doors, Esther close behind him. I watched through the pharmacy's windows as they got into his BMW. The same car I'd ridden in that morning, feeling hopeful because the treatment was working, my tumor markers dropping, my oncologist cautiously optimistic. The engine started and they pulled away, leaving me collapsed in a plastic chair in Henderson's pharmacy, wearing yesterday's clothes because nothing else fit my changed body, clutching a trash can and trying not to vomit again in front of strangers. "Honey," the pharmacist said gently, kneeling beside my chair. "Do you have someone else you can call? Family? Friends?" I stared at my phone, scrolling through contacts that seemed to belong to a different person's life. My parents lived 3 states away and didn't even know how bad the treatments had gotten. Robert had insisted we handle this privately and not burden them with drama. My few close friends had gradually disappeared over the months, some genuinely busy, others clearly uncomfortable with illness and its unglamorous realities. "I'll figure something out," I whispered, though I had no idea how. The pharmacist squeezed my shoulder. "I'm going to call your doctor's office right now about that medication, and there's a bench outside if you need fresh air. Don't worry about the mess. These things happen." As she walked away, I closed my eyes and let the full weight of my situation settle over me. 6 months into fighting for my life, and the person who was supposed to love me most had just abandoned me on a sidewalk because my cancer was inconvenient for him. I had no idea that in 30 minutes, everything would change forever. The pharmacist, whose name tag read April, returned to my side within minutes, her face grim but determined. I spoke with Dr. Martinez's office. "They're sending someone over immediately with your medication and they want to assess your condition." She paused, studying my face with the trained eye of someone who'd seen too many sick people struggle alone. "Honey, when did you last eat? When did you last keep anything down?" I tried to remember, but the days since my treatment had blurred together in a haze of nausea and exhaustion. "Yesterday morning, maybe? Some toast before the infusion." April's expression grew more concerned. "That was over 24 hours. Go! No wonder you're so weak." She disappeared into the back of the pharmacy and returned with a small bottle of electrolyte solution and a pack of saltines. "These are on the house. Tiny sips, okay? Your body needs something to work with." The high, elderly man who'd been watching earlier approached hesitantly. "Miss, I don't mean to intrude, but I couldn't help overhearing. My wife went through chemo 5 years ago." He gestured toward a woman sitting near the blood pressure machine. "May I?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of a beautiful woman with a bright smile and no hair. This was taken right after her 4th round of carboplatin. She couldn't keep anything down for 3 days, nearly had to be hospitalized for dehydration. His wife, noticing our conversation, walked over, slowly. "Oh, honey," she said, taking in my appearance with immediate understanding. "You're in the thick of it, aren't you? What protocol are you on?" "Carboplatin and Taxol," I managed between small sips of the electrolyte drink. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Third round. She nodded knowingly. That's a rough combination. Very effective, but brutal on your system. The nausea can be absolutely debilitating if you don't stay ahead of it with the antiemetics. She sat down in the chair beside me. I'm Kelly, by the way. This is my husband, Gil. Delilah, I whispered, feeling tears threaten. Here were complete strangers showing me more compassion than my own husband had. Where's your support person today? Kelly asked gently. Usually they don't let chemo patients leave without someone to monitor them for the first 24 hours. The question opened something painful in my chest. My husband brought me, but he had to leave. Gil and Kelly exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They'd been married long enough to communicate, without words, and clearly long enough to recognize a diplomatic lie when they heard one. Delilah, Kelly said carefully, I don't want to overstep, but in my support group, we met a lot of different families. Some people handle a cancer diagnosis better than others. The stress can bring out the worst in people, or sometimes it reveals what was already there. Before I could respond, the automatic doors slid open and Dr. Martinez hurried in, followed by 2 nurses from the cancer center. At 55, Dr. Martinez was a formidable woman with silver-streaked hair, pulled back in a practical bun, and the kind of presence that commanded immediate respect. She spotted me immediately, and her expression shifted from professional concern to barely contained anger. Delilah, she said, kneeling beside my chair and immediately checking my pulse. April called and said you've been abandoned here? Where's Robert? The simple question broke something inside me. He said I was being dramatic, that it was just nausea and I needed to stop making a scene. The words tumbled out faster now. Esther agreed with him. They drove away and left me here because I couldn't stop throwing up. Dr. Martinez's jaw tightened. One of the nurses, a young man named Bobby, who'd administered my treatments, looked genuinely shocked. He left you here? After a carboplatin infusion? Doesn't he understand how dangerous dehydration can be with your protocol? We've explained the side effects multiple times, Dr. Martinez said, her voice carefully controlled but with an edge. That could cut glass. We've given him literature. We've had him sit through the education sessions. He knows exactly how serious post-chemo complications can be. She was right. I remembered the appointment 3 weeks ago when Dr. Martinez had looked directly at Robert and explained that my particular combination of drugs could cause severe nausea and dehydration, that I would need constant monitoring for 48 hours after each treatment, that emergency room visits weren't uncommon if patients couldn't keep fluids down. Robert had nodded and asked intelligent questions about timing and symptoms to watch for. He'd even taken notes on his phone. But somehow, faced with the actual reality of my suffering, all that knowledge had transformed into accusations of attention-seeking and drama. This is medical neglect, Dr. Martinez continued, checking my blood pressure with a portable cuff one of the nurses had brought. Leaving a chemo patient alone when they're actively vomiting and haven't eaten in over 24 hours isn't just cruel, it's dangerous. Your blood pressure is low, you're clearly dehydrated, and your color is terrible. Kelly leaned forward. Doctor, we've been trying to help. I went through the same protocol and I know how brutal it can be. Thank you, Dr. Martinez said sincerely. It means everything when patients support each other. Unfortunately, not all family members rise to the occasion. She turned back to me. Delilah, we need to get you back to the center for IV fluids and proper antiemetics. You're borderline for admission, and if we can't get this nausea controlled and get some nutrition into you, we'll need to consider hospitalizing you. But Robert, I started. Robert isn't here, Dr. Martinez said firmly. He made a choice to abandon you when you needed medical care. Right now, my only concern is your health and safety. Bobby helped me to my feet while the other nurse gathered the medication April had finally managed to authorize. We'll take you in our car, he said gently. You shouldn't be riding in a regular vehicle feeling this sick anyway. We have equipment, if you need it." As we walked toward the doors, April appeared with a small bag. "I put together some things that might help," she said quietly. "Ginger chews, some electrolyte packets, and I wrote down some tips my customers have shared about managing chemo nausea. You take care of yourself, honey." Gil and Kelly followed us outside. "Here's my number," Kelly said, pressing a piece of paper into my hand. "I know you don't know us, but if you need someone who understands what you're going through, please call. Cancer is hard enough without going through it alone." As Bobby helped me into the passenger seat of the cancer center's medical transport vehicle, I caught sight of my reflection in the side mirror. I looked like a ghost, pale, hollow-eyed, wearing a knit cap that couldn't quite hide how sick I was. But for the first time in months, I wasn't alone with my suffering. Complete strangers had shown me more care and understanding in 30 minutes than Robert had in weeks. Dr. Martinez climbed into the driver's seat and adjusted the rearview mirror to keep an eye on me. "Delilah, I want you to know that what happened today isn't normal. A spouse doesn't abandon their partner during cancer treatment. This isn't about you being difficult or dramatic. This is about someone failing to provide basic human decency during a medical crisis." As we drove away from Henderson's pharmacy, I wondered if Robert even realized what he'd done, or if he was already constructing a story in his mind about how I'd overreacted and embarrassed him in public. I had no idea that his version of events was about to collide very publicly with medical reality. Robert's BMW pulled into our driveway at Willowbrook Estates 45 minutes after they'd abandoned me. I knew this because Dr. Martinez had insisted on having someone call our home to check if he'd returned, concerned about my transportation situation and wanting to understand exactly what had happened. What she discovered would become crucial evidence later. Our neighbor, Ian Parker, had been washing his car in his driveway when Robert and Esther returned. Ian later told me they were laughing as they got out of the car, Esther carrying shopping bags from the mall. They'd gone shopping. While I was collapsed in a pharmacy chair, unable to keep down sips of electrolyte solution, they had spent the afternoon at Westfield Shopping Center buying Esther a new handbag. "I thought maybe there had been some emergency," Ian had said too, Robert walking over with genuine concern. "I saw the medical transport van from the cancer center leave with Delilah about 20 minutes ago. She looked really sick. Is everything okay?" According to Ian, Robert's demeanor changed instantly. The laughter stopped. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, then calculation, then something that looked like panic. "Medical transport?" Robert had asked. "What do you mean?" "3 people in scrubs came and got her," Ian explained. "Dr. Martinez was driving. Delilah could barely walk to the car. What happened? Where were you?" That's when Robert's story began to take shape, the narrative he would repeat for months afterward, the version that would paint me as an unstable, attention-seeking wife who'd engineered a medical crisis for sympathy. "She's been doing this for weeks," Robert told Ian, his voice taking on that familiar tone of long-suffering patience. "Ever since the diagnosis, she's become completely hysterical about every little side effect. The doctors have told her the nausea is normal, but she acts like she's dying every time she feels queasy." Esther nodded vigorously. "It's honestly exhausting. We took her to get her prescription, and she started making this huge scene in the pharmacy, throwing up dramatically, demanding special treatment, acting like she was having some kind of medical emergency. People were staring." "But surely," Ian began, clearly uncomfortable with their description. "The doctors enable her?" Robert continued, warming to his theme. "They come running every time she calls claiming she needs emergency care. It's gotten so bad that I can't take her anywhere without her creating some crisis that requires medical intervention. I'm starting to think she enjoys the attention." Ian would later tell me he'd felt something was wrong with their story, especially given how sick I'd looked when the medical team arrived. But Robert was persuasive, and he had Esther there to corroborate every detail. 2 against 1, a husband and sister-in-law expressing concern about an increasingly unstable wife. "The shopping bags?" Ian had asked, noticing Esther still clutching. "Her purchases." "We had to leave," Esther explained smoothly. "Robert couldn't handle watching her performance anymore. We thought maybe some time to calm down would help her realize how inappropriate her behavior was. We ran a few errands, gave her space to get herself together. It was masterful, really. They'd taken the facts, my vomiting, their departure, my need for medical care, and reframed them entirely. In their version, I was the problem. The dramatic wife who'd weaponized her cancer for attention, who'd forced them to leave through my unreasonable behavior, who'd manufactured a medical emergency because I couldn't handle normal side effects. Meanwhile, at Riverside Cancer Center, the actual medical emergency was unfolding exactly as Dr. Martinez had predicted. My blood pressure had dropped dangerously low during the drive, and they'd had to start IV fluids immediately upon arrival. My electrolyte levels were severely depleted, and my dehydration was approaching the threshold that would require hospitalization. "This is what we call acute post-chemotherapy complications," Dr. Martinez explained to Bobby while they worked to stabilize me. "When patients can't keep fluids down for extended periods after carboplatin, their systems can crash quickly. It's exactly why we require supervised recovery periods." Bobby shook his head as he adjusted my IV drip. "I can't believe her husband just left her there. In 6 years working here, I've never seen anything like it." "Unfortunately, I have," Dr. Martinez said grimly. "Cancer has a way of revealing people's true characters. Some rise to the occasion and become caregivers. Others see illness as an inconvenience and sick people as burdens. They'd managed to reach my emergency contact, my sister April, who lived 2 hours away in Richmond. She was already in her car, driving toward the cancer center with a fury that could have powered small aircraft." "He did what?" April's voice had crackled through the speakerphone in Dr. Martinez's office. "He left her alone at a pharmacy after chemo? Is she okay? Please tell me she's okay." "She's stable now," Dr. Martinez assured her. "But this could have been much more serious. Dehydration at this level can cause kidney damage, especially combined with her treatment protocol." April arrived at the cancer center just as Robert and Esther were pulling into the parking lot, apparently having realized that leaving your wife during a medical emergency might require some damage control. The timing was perfect for what would become the most revealing conversation of the entire ordeal. Robert strode into the cancer center with Esther close behind, both of them wearing expressions of concerned confusion. To anyone watching, they looked like worried family members arriving to check on a loved one. "Where is she?" Robert asked the receptionist. "We got a call that Delilah was brought here. There must be some misunderstanding." April, who had been waiting in the lobby, stood up slowly. At 5'10" with the same auburn hair I'd had before chemo, she was an intimidating presence when angry. And she was very, very angry. "Misunderstanding?" April's voice cut through the quiet lobby like a blade. "The misunderstanding is how you could abandon your wife during cancer treatment." Robert's face went through that same series of expressions Ian had witnessed. Confusion, calculation, panic. But he recovered quickly, switching to his prepared narrative. "April, thank God you're here," he said, his voice heavy with relief and concern. "Delilah had another one of her episodes today. She's been getting increasingly unstable since the treatment started, and today she just snapped. We couldn't calm her down." "Episodes?" April's voice was dangerously quiet. "The cancer has been really hard on her mentally," Esther chimed in, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "She's become so fragile, so dramatic about every little symptom. Today she started throwing up in the pharmacy and just lost it. Started screaming that she was dying, demanding emergency care. It was honestly frightening." April looked from Robert to Esther and back again, her expression unreadable. "So you left her there?" "We had to," Robert said, his voice taking on that long-suffering tone. She was creating such a scene, disturbing other customers. We thought if we gave her some space to calm down, she might realize how she was acting. "Space," April repeated slowly. "You gave a chemotherapy patient space by abandoning her at a pharmacy when she couldn't stop vomiting." "It wasn't abandonment," Esther protested. "We knew she'd be fine. She always is. These episodes always pass, and then she acts like nothing happened." That's when Dr. Martinez appeared from the treatment area, her expression thunderous. She'd heard every word. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 20 years treating cancer patients. "Your wife nearly required emergency hospitalization today due to severe dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. This wasn't an episode. This was a life-threatening medical emergency that occurred because she was left without proper post-treatment monitoring." The lobby went silent. Robert's carefully constructed narrative was about to meet medical reality, and everyone present was about to witness the collision. "Life-threatening?" Robert's voice had gone small, uncertain. "Her blood pressure was 85/50 when we found her," Dr. Martinez continued. "She hadn't kept food down in over 36 hours. Another 2 hours without intervention, and we would have been looking at potential kidney damage." Robert's face was now completely white. Esther had taken a step back, as if she could distance herself from the situation. But she was just throwing up," Esther whispered. "People throw up from chemo all the time." Dr. Martinez turned her, full attention to Esther, and I almost felt sorry for her. "Almost? Yes, they do. Which is exactly why we never discharge chemotherapy patients without a responsible adult committed to monitoring them. Which is why we provide detailed instructions about danger signs. Which is why we make emergency contact information mandatory." She pulled out a folder and opened it on the reception desk. "These are the discharge instructions I went over with both of you 3 hours ago. Would you like me to read the part about when to seek emergency care?" Robert couldn't speak. The evidence of his negligence was right there in black and white, with his signature acknowledging he understood the risks and responsibilities. April stepped closer to her brother-in-law, her voice deadly calm. "So let me understand this. You were given explicit instructions about monitoring Delilah for dangerous symptoms. She developed those exact symptoms, and instead of following the medical guidelines you'd been given, you decided she was being dramatic and left her helpless in a public place." The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, Robert found his voice. I didn't realize. She's been so emotional lately, I thought." "You thought wrong," Dr. Martinez said simply. "And your wife nearly paid the price for that mistake." The cancer center lobby had never felt smaller. Robert stood frozen under Dr. Martinez's withering gaze while April's fury filled the space like a gathering storm. But before anyone could say another word, the automatic doors slid open with their familiar whoosh, and Robert's mother entered like she owned the place. Patricia Harrison was 68 years old and had perfected the art of appearing concerned, while actually being controlling. She swept into the lobby wearing her signature pearls and a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the fact that she'd clearly rushed here, and her expression held that particular blend of worry and authority that she wielded like a weapon. "What on earth is going on?" Patricia demanded, her voice carrying across the lobby. "Robert called me in a panic saying Delilah was having some kind of breakdown. Where is she? Is she all right?" Robert's relief at his mother's arrival was palpable. Patricia had always been his greatest defender, the person who could spin any situation to make him look like the victim. Growing up, she'd excused his temper tantrums as passion, his cruelty to smaller children as leadership, and his inability to accept responsibility as sensitivity. "Mom, thank God you're here," Robert said, his voice gaining strength now. That reinforcements had arrived. "Delilah had an episode at the pharmacy today. A really bad one. She started throwing up and screaming, causing a huge scene. We had to leave because she was disturbing other customers. Patricia's expression immediately shifted into protective mother mode. Oh, that poor girl. The cancer has been so hard on her mental state. I've been telling Robert for weeks that she needs professional help for her anxiety. April's eyebrows shot up. Anxiety. Well, yes, Patricia continued, settling into the narrative like a comfortable chair. She's been so unstable since the diagnosis, crying over every little thing, demanding constant attention, making Robert's life absolutely miserable with her emotional outbursts. Dr. Martinez, who had been listening to this exchange with growing incredulity, stepped forward. Mrs. Harrison, your daughter-in-law was experiencing severe dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. This wasn't anxiety. This was a medical emergency. But Patricia was already shaking her head, that patient smile spreading across her face. The one she used when she thought she was dealing with someone who simply didn't understand the situation. Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but I know Delilah. I've watched her manipulate situations for attention our entire marriage. She has a pattern of creating medical crises whenever she feels like Robert isn't paying enough attention to her. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. April's face had gone white with rage, but before she could respond, Patricia was already building her case. Just last month, she claimed she was too weak to attend Robert's company dinner. But when I drove by their house that evening, I saw her gardening in the backyard. She suddenly had plenty of energy when it came to her flowers, but was too sick to support her husband's career. Esther, emboldened by Patricia's support, jumped in eagerly. And the grocery shopping. She always claims she's too nauseous to shop for food, but somehow she manages to get to the farmer's market every week for her special organic vegetables. Exactly, Patricia continued, her voice gaining momentum. She's learned that cancer gives her a free pass to avoid responsibilities while demanding sympathy. It's honestly heartbreaking to watch what she's put Robert through. Dr. Martinez's jaw tightened. In 20 years of oncology practice, she'd encountered family dynamics that ranged from supportive to dysfunctional, but this level of coordinated gaslighting was something special. Mrs. Harrison, she said, her voice carefully controlled, your daughter-in-law's blood pressure was critically low when we found her. Her electrolyte levels required immediate intervention. These are objective medical facts, not anxiety symptoms. But surely she could have mentioned feeling unwell before they left the house, Patricia countered smoothly. If she was really as sick as you say, why didn't she speak up? Why wait until they were in public to have this dramatic collapse? It was a masterful piece of victim blaming. Patricia had taken the facts, my deteriorating condition, my vomiting at the pharmacy, my need for emergency care, and reframed them as evidence of manipulation. In her version, I should have somehow predicted and prevented my own medical emergency. She did mention feeling unwell, April said, her voice dangerously quiet. She told them she needed her anti-nausea medication urgently. They dismissed her concerns and called her dramatic. Well, she would say that now? Esther interjected. She always has an excuse ready when people question her behavior. Patricia nodded sagely. That's exactly what I mean. Delilah has become very good at revising history to make herself look like the victim. It's a classic pattern with attention-seeking behavior. Dr. Martinez had heard enough. She pulled out her tablet and began scrolling through my medical records with the efficient movements of someone who'd had this conversation too many times before. Would you like to see the objective medical data? She asked, turning the screen toward Patricia. These are your daughter-in-law's vital signs from today. Blood pressure, heart rate, electrolyte levels, hydration status, all critically abnormal, all requiring immediate intervention. Patricia glanced at the screen briefly, then waved it away with a dismissive gesture. Doctors can make numbers say anything they want. What I'm concerned about is the pattern of behavior I've been observing for months. What pattern? April demanded. The constant doctor visits, Patricia began, counting on her fingers. The endless complaints about side effects. The way she's made Robert into a full-time caregiver instead of letting him focus on his work. The manipulation tactics she uses whenever he tries to maintain any independence. Robert nodded vigorously. That's exactly what I've been trying to tell people. She's turned every medical appointment into a crisis, every side effect into an emergency. I can't live my life anymore because I'm constantly managing her emotional outbursts. And now this, Esther added, gesturing around the cancer center. The most dramatic performance yet. Getting the entire medical team involved because we wouldn't enable her attention-seeking behavior. The three of them stood there like a united front, their stories perfectly aligned, their version of events internally consistent. To an outside observer who didn't know the medical facts, they might have sounded convincing. A concerned mother, a frustrated sister-in-law, and an overwhelmed husband dealing with a wife whose mental health had deteriorated under the stress of cancer. April looked between them with something approaching amazement. You actually believe what you're saying. We believe in accountability, Patricia replied primly. Delilah needs to take responsibility for her actions instead of hiding behind her diagnosis. Her actions? April's voice was rising now. You mean the action of getting cancer? The action of requiring chemotherapy? The action of experiencing documented medical side effects? The action of weaponizing her illness to control everyone around her, Robert said, his confidence returning with his mother's support. I've been patient, April. I've tried to be understanding. But there comes a point where enabling someone's manipulation isn't helping them heal. Dr. Martinez closed her tablet with a snap that echoed through the lobby. I've heard enough. Mrs. Harrison, your daughter-in-law is currently receiving IV fluids because she was dangerously dehydrated. Mr. Harrison, you signed documentation, acknowledging your responsibility to monitor her for exactly the symptoms she experienced. Ms. Harrison, she turned to Esther, you participated in abandoning a chemotherapy patient during a medical emergency. Patricia's expression didn't change. Doctor, I understand you have to defend your patient, but as family, we see a bigger picture than you do. Sometimes the kindest thing is to refuse to enable destructive behavior. Destructive behavior, Dr. Martinez repeated slowly. Like requiring anti-nausea medication after chemotherapy. Like creating unnecessary drama to get attention, Patricia corrected. Like forcing medical professionals to drop everything and respond to manufactured emergencies. The lobby fell silent except for the quiet hum of medical equipment and the distant sounds of patient care continuing throughout the building. 3 family members stood united in their conviction that I was the problem, while my actual medical team, people who understood the realities of cancer treatment, watched. In professional horror? April broke the silence with a laugh that held no humor at all. This is unbelievable. Delilah is fighting for her life, and you 3 have convinced yourselves that she's the villain in this story. We're trying to help her, Patricia said, her voice taking on that long-suffering tone she'd passed down to her son. Sometimes helping someone means refusing to participate in their self-destructive patterns. Dr. Martinez looked at each of them in turn, her expression unreadable. I'm going to check on my patient now. The patient who nearly required hospitalization because she was abandoned during a medical emergency. You're welcome to wait here, but I suggest you think very carefully about how you want to proceed when she's stable enough to make decisions about her care. As Dr. Martinez walked away, the 3 family members huddled together, already beginning to plan their next move. They'd convinced themselves they were the real victims here. The long-suffering relatives dealing with an unstable woman who'd weaponized her cancer for attention. They had no idea that their conversation had been overheard by a lobby full of cancer patients and families, people who understood exactly what they'd just witnessed. The whisper network was already forming, and truth had a way of traveling faster than lies. But first, I had to survive the next few hours. While Patricia, Robert, and Esther constructed their elaborate narrative in the lobby, I was in treatment. Room 7, hooked up to an IV that was slowly bringing me back from the edge of medical crisis. But what they didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that their version of events was about to collide with something more powerful than family loyalty or coordinated lies. Documentation. Dr. Martinez had been treating cancer patients for 2 decades, and she'd learned early in her career that family dynamics could be as dangerous as the disease itself. She'd developed a habit of thorough record-keeping, not just about medical treatments, but about the support systems that either helped or hindered her patients' recovery. Today's events had triggered every alarm bell in her professional experience. "Bobby," she said quietly to the nurse checking my vitals, "I need you to pull up the security footage from the pharmacy pickup area." April, the pharmacist, said she has cameras that cover the entire transaction area. Bobby looked up from adjusting my IV drip. "You think there's more to this story?" "I know there is," Dr. Martinez replied grimly. "I've seen gaslighting before, but nothing quite this coordinated. 3 people telling the exact same story with the exact same talking points? That's not memory. That's strategy." She was right. What had happened at Henderson's pharmacy wasn't just abandonment. It was a calculated performance designed to paint me as unstable while positioning Robert and Esther as long-suffering victims. But performances leave evidence, and evidence doesn't lie. April from the pharmacy had arrived at the cancer center 20 minutes earlier, still wearing her work uniform and carrying a manila folder. She'd heard about the confrontation in the lobby and had decided that someone needed to speak for what she'd actually witnessed. "Dr. Martinez," she said, approaching the nurse's station. "I brought copies of everything from today. The insurance, records, the timestamp of when Delilah's prescription was called in, the security footage from our cameras, and my written incident report." Dr. Martinez looked up from her tablet. "Incident report? I file one whenever I witness what appears to be medical neglect or abuse," April explained. "It's pharmacy policy. When I saw how they treated her and then just left her there, I knew someone would need documentation of what actually happened." The folder April opened contained a timeline that would prove devastating to Robert's carefully constructed narrative. The security footage showed me entering the pharmacy at 2:17 p.m., already pale and unsteady. The audio, though muffled, clearly captured Robert's dismissive comments and Esther's agreement. Most damning of all, it showed them leaving me collapsed, in a chair at 2:43 p.m., not fleeing a dramatic outburst, but abandoning someone in obvious medical distress. "There's more," April continued, pulling out her handwritten notes. "When they left, I heard the husband say something to his sister about teaching her a lesson about consequences. Those were his exact words. Teaching me a lesson, as if cancer treatment was some kind of moral failing that required correction through abandonment. But the most significant piece of evidence wasn't in April's folder. It was in Dr. Martinez's own records. She pulled up my chart from that morning's chemotherapy session, specifically the discharge planning notes. "Look at this," she said to Bobby, pointing to the screen. "I specifically told Mr. Harrison that the carboplatin-taxol combination can cause severe delayed nausea, especially in patients who've had prior episodes. I warned him that dehydration could develop rapidly and that he needed to monitor for specific symptoms." Bobby read over her shoulder. "And you documented that he acknowledged understanding the risks?" "More than that. He asked detailed questions about timing and severity. He took notes on his phone. He specifically asked what to do if vomiting prevented her from keeping down the anti-nausea medication." Dr. Martinez's voice grew harder. He knew exactly what to watch for, and he knew exactly how dangerous it would be to leave her alone when those symptoms appeared. This wasn't ignorance or panic. This was deliberate neglect by someone who understood the medical consequences of his actions. The evidence was mounting like a dam about to burst. Ian Parker, our neighbor, had called the cancer center after his unsettling conversation with Robert. His account directly contradicted their timeline. They'd returned home laughing and carrying shopping bags. not distressed about a wife's medical emergency. The shopping receipts would later show purchases made at 3:15 p.m., 30 minutes after they'd abandoned me, and 20 minutes after my medical team had already retrieved me from the pharmacy. While I was receiving emergency IV fluids, they were buying Esther a handbag at Nordstrom. But perhaps the most damaging evidence was hiding in plain sight: Robert's own text messages. In the rush to construct their victim narrative, he'd forgotten about the digital trail he'd been leaving for weeks. Dr. Martinez had asked me for permission to document any communications that might be relevant to my care, a standard practice, when family dynamics interfered with treatment. I'd given her access to my phone, and what she found painted a picture of psychological abuse that had been escalating throughout my treatment. "Look at this." She showed Bobby a series of texts from the past month. Messages from Robert complaining that my treatment schedule was inconvenient for his work meetings. Accusations that I was milking my symptoms for attention. Complaints to his sister about being trapped by my medical needs. The most recent message, sent that morning while I was receiving chemotherapy, read, "Maybe if she has to deal with the consequences of her drama alone for once, she'll learn to stop making everything about her." He'd planned this. The abandonment wasn't a moment of frustration or poor judgment. It was a calculated decision to teach me a lesson about what he perceived as attention-seeking behavior. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Patricia was still holding court, explaining to anyone who would listen how I'd manipulated the situation. But the audience was changing. Other cancer patients and their families were beginning to speak up, sharing their own observations about the scene they'd witnessed. An elderly man receiving treatment for prostate cancer approached April with quiet anger. "I heard what that family was saying about your sister," he said. "My wife went through chemo last year, and what they're describing isn't normal patient behavior. That's medical crisis behavior." A woman waiting for her daughter's appointment added, "I've been coming here for 6 months, and I've never seen Dr. Martinez respond like that to anything less than a genuine emergency. She doesn't waste resources on attention-seeking patients." The whisper network was forming, just as it had in the original story, but this time it was powered by people who understood cancer treatment intimately. They recognized the difference between normal anxiety and medical emergency. They knew what real post-chemo complications looked like, and they'd just watched 3 people systematically gaslight a cancer patient's experience. Dr. Martinez returned to the lobby with a different energy. She was no longer just defending a patient. She was armed with documentation, medical evidence, and a timeline that would expose every lie Patricia's family had told. "Mrs. Harrison," she said, her voice cutting through the conversation, "I have some questions about your son's understanding of post-chemotherapy care protocols." Patricia looked up with that same condescending smile. "Of course, doctor. We're very committed to Delilah's care." "Excellent," Dr. Martinez replied, opening her tablet. "Then you can help me understand why your son sent text messages this morning, describing his plan to abandon his wife during a medical emergency as a way to teach her consequences." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the pause of people processing information. This was the silence of people realizing their lies had just been exposed with documentation they couldn't refute. Patricia's face went through a series of expressions, finally settling on something that looked like panic. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Dr. Martinez continued. "We also have security footage from the pharmacy showing the actual sequence of events, witness statements from the pharmacist, and medical records showing that your son was explicitly warned about the exact symptoms his wife experienced." Robert had gone completely white. Esther was, backing toward the exit, and Patricia, for the first time in her life, found herself completely without words. The truth was finally catching up with their lies, and everyone in the lobby was about to witness what happened when medical documentation met coordinated family. Gaslighting. The reckoning was just beginning. The lobby of Riverside, Cancer Center had transformed into an impromptu courtroom, with Dr. Martinez serving as both prosecutor and judge. The evidence she'd compiled wasn't just damaging to Robert's narrative. It was devastating. But what happened next would cross a line that no amount of family manipulation could ever undo. Robert's face had gone from white to gray as the implications of Dr. Martinez's evidence began to sink in. The text messages, the security footage, the medical records, all of it painted him not as a concerned husband dealing with an unstable wife, but as someone who had deliberately endangered a cancer patient's life. "Those messages," Robert stammered, his voice barely audible. "They were taken out of context. I was frustrated, yes, but I never meant—" "You never meant what?" Dr. Martinez's voice cut through his attempted explanation like a scalpel. "You never meant to abandon your wife during a medical emergency? Because the evidence suggests otherwise." Patricia, who had built her entire identity around protecting her son from the consequences of his actions, made a decision that would haunt the family for years to come. Instead of acknowledging the evidence or encouraging Robert to take responsibility, she doubled down in the most spectacular way possible. "Doctor," Patricia said, her voice taking on a tone of authority that had intimidated teachers, neighbors, and family members for decades. "I don't care what your so-called evidence shows. I know my son, and I know that manipulative woman he married. If she was really as sick as you claim, she would have said something before they left the house." April, who had been quietly seething during Patricia's earlier performance, finally snapped. "She did say something. She told them she was feeling worse and needed her medication urgently. I heard it myself." "You heard what she wanted you to hear," Patricia shot back, her composure finally cracking. "Delilah has perfected the art of looking pathetic to get sympathy. She's been doing it for years." Dr. Martinez stepped forward, her professional mask slipping for the first time that day. "Mrs. Harrison, your daughter-in-law's blood pressure was 85/50 when we found her. Her heart rate was elevated, her electrolytes were dangerously low, and she was clinically dehydrated. These are not symptoms someone can fake." "Numbers on a screen," Patricia dismissed with a wave of her hand. "I've seen Delilah turn on the tears and the weakness whenever she wants something. Today she wanted attention, so she created a crisis." That's when something shifted in the lobby. Other families who had been quietly listening began to react with visible disgust. A woman receiving treatment for breast cancer stood up from her chair, her own bald head covered by a colorful scarf. "I can't listen to this anymore," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "I've been coming here for 8 months, and I know what real chemotherapy complications look like. Your daughter-in-law could have died from dehydration, and you're standing here calling her manipulative?" Her husband, a man who'd been quietly supportive throughout his wife's treatment, added, "We've been in that exact situation. The nausea, the inability to keep fluids down, the emergency trips for IV hydration. It's terrifying, and it's real." But Patricia wasn't listening to cancer patients or medical professionals. She was listening to the voice in her head that had spent 35 years protecting Robert from accountability. And that voice was telling her to attack. "I suppose you all think you're experts on my family," Patricia said, turning to address the lobby full of patients and families. "But you don't know what we've been dealing with. You don't know how she's manipulated every situation, how she's made Robert's life miserable with her constant demands for attention." Robert, perhaps sensing that his mother was making things worse, tried to intervene. "Mom, maybe we should—" "No," Patricia cut him off, her voice rising. "I'm tired of everyone enabling her behavior. Someone needs to speak the truth about what kind of person uses cancer as a weapon to control their family." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Esther, who had been Patricia's eager supporter, looked horrified by what her aunt had just said. Using cancer as a weapon. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning any remaining sympathy anyone might have had for their position. Dr. Martinez's voice, when she finally spoke, was deadly quiet. "Did you just accuse a cancer patient of using her diagnosis as a weapon?" Patricia, perhaps realizing she'd gone too far but unable to back down, pressed forward. "I accused a manipulative woman of exploiting her illness for sympathy and control. There's a difference." "No," said the breast cancer patient who had spoken earlier, tears now streaming down her face. "There really isn't. What you just said is the most disgusting thing I've ever heard in this place, and I've heard some terrible things." An elderly man receiving treatment for lung cancer struggled to his feet, supported by his adult daughter. "Ma'am," he said, his voice weak but filled with indignation, "I've been fighting cancer for 2 years. I've lost 40 pounds, lost my hair, lost my strength. But I've never lost my dignity until I heard what you just said about that poor girl." Lobby was in revolt. Families who had been quietly observing were now actively confronting Patricia's statement. These were people who lived with cancer daily, who understood the difference between medical crisis and attention-seeking, who recognized psychological abuse when they witnessed it. But Patricia, backed into a corner and faced with universal condemnation, made the choice that would define her character forever. Instead of apologizing or backing down, she escalated. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "If you all want to enable her pathetic behavior, go ahead. But don't expect my family to participate in this charade anymore. Robert deserves better than being trapped by a wife who weaponizes her illness." She turned to Robert, her voice taking on the commanding tone she'd used when he was a child. "We're leaving. Now. Let her find her own way home from her manufactured emergency." Robert looked around the lobby, seeing the faces of cancer patients and families staring at him with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. He looked at April, his sister-in-law, whose expression of horror seemed to finally penetrate his consciousness. He looked at Dr. Martinez, whose professional composure barely concealed her fury. And then he made his choice. "You're right, Mom," he said quietly. "Let's go." As they walked toward the exit, Patricia's voice carried back to the silent lobby. "Don't expect us to come running the next time she creates a crisis for attention. We're done enabling her manipulation." The automatic doors slid shut behind them, leaving behind a lobby full of people who had just witnessed something unprecedented. A family abandoning a cancer patient not once, but twice, with full knowledge of the medical consequences. Dr. Martinez stood in the silence, holding the documentation that proved everything they had just denied. The text messages planning the abandonment, the security footage showing the reality of what happened, the medical records proving the severity of my condition. She had all the evidence she needed to hold them accountable. But more importantly, she had witnessed something that would change how she approached family dynamics in cancer care forever. The abandonment wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what kind of people they were, revealed under pressure when the stakes were life and death, and everyone in that lobby now knew exactly what kind of people they were. The automatic doors had barely closed behind Robert, Patricia, and Esther when the true weight of what had just happened began to settle over the cancer center lobby. The silence was broken by the sound of someone crying. The breast cancer patient who had confronted Patricia was sobbing quietly, her husband's arm around her shoulders. "I'm sorry," she whispered to April. "I'm so sorry your sister has to deal with this. No one should go through cancer alone." April, who had maintained her composure throughout the confrontation, finally let her own tears fall. "Thank you, all of you, for speaking up when her own family wouldn't." Dr. Martinez stood frozen for a moment, processing what she'd just witnessed. In 20 years of oncology practice, she'd seen families struggle with the stress of cancer diagnosis. She'd watched marriages crumble under the pressure of treatments and uncertainty. But she had never seen anything quite like this. The calculated cruelty, the coordinated gaslighting, the complete abandonment of a patient during a medical crisis. "I need to check on Delilah," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "Bobby, can you handle things here?" The young nurse nodded, but his usual cheerful demeanor had been replaced by something harder. "Doctor, what they just did. Is there anything we can report? Some kind of authority that handles medical neglect?" "I'm looking into it," Dr. Martinez replied grimly. "Right now, my priority is making sure she's stable and safe." She walked back toward treatment room 7, her mind racing through protocols and procedures. The medical emergency was under control. My IV fluids were working, my blood pressure had stabilized, and the anti-nausea medication was finally taking effect. But the emotional and psychological crisis was just beginning. How do you tell a cancer patient that her husband just abandoned her twice in one day? How do you explain that his family not only supported his decision, but publicly accused her of weaponizing her illness? How do you provide care to someone whose support system had just revealed itself to be actively harmful? Meanwhile, in the parking lot outside, Robert sat in his BMW while Patricia and Esther got into their own cars. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation was wearing off, and reality was beginning to seep in like cold water through a crack in a dam. He pulled out his phone and stared at it for a long moment before finally dialing our home number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. The sound of my voice on the recording, recorded months ago when I was still healthy, still hopeful, hit him like a physical blow. "Hi, you've reached Robert and Delilah. We can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and we'll get back to you." The cheerful optimism in my pre-cancer voice was like hearing a ghost. Robert hung up without leaving a message. Esther had pulled up beside him and rolled down her window. "Are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," Robert said automatically, though he clearly wasn't. Do you think we did the right thing?" Esther's expression hardened. "Of course we did. Someone had to take a stand. She's been manipulating everyone for months, and now even the medical staff is enabling her behavior." But Robert's certainty was cracking. The faces of the cancer patients in the lobby haunted him. Their shock, their disgust, their genuine horror at what they'd witnessed. These weren't people who could be easily fooled by manipulation. These were people who lived with cancer every day, who understood the reality of treatment better than anyone. "What if we're wrong?" he asked quietly. "We're not wrong," Esther said, firmly. "Don't let them guilt you into doubting yourself. You know Delilah better than any of those strangers." But did he? Robert sat in his car as Esther drove away, trying to remember the last time he'd really looked at me. Not at my symptoms or my limitations or my inconvenient medical needs, but at me. When had I become the enemy in my own cancer story? Back. In the cancer center, Dr. Martinez had reached my room to find me finally stable, but still weak. The IV had done its work, bringing my blood pressure back to normal ranges and restoring some color to my cheeks. But my eyes, when they met hers, held a question I was afraid to ask. "Where's Robert?" I whispered. Dr. Martinez pulled up a chair, beside my bed, her expression careful. "Delilah, I need to tell you what happened in the lobby. Some difficult things were said, and I want you to hear them from me first." She explained everything gently, but honestly. The confrontation with April, Patricia's arrival and escalation, the evidence that had been compiled, and finally, their decision to leave. Not just the building, but me. "He left again?" I asked, my voice so small it was barely audible. "Yes," Dr. Martinez said simply. "They all did." The silence that followed was different from any I'd experienced during my cancer journey. It wasn't the silence of waiting for test results or enduring treatment side effects. It was the silence of abandonment, of realizing that the person who was supposed to love you most had chosen his own comfort over your survival. "I don't understand," I whispered. "I have cancer. I'm fighting for my life. How does that make me the villain?" Dr. Martinez reached over and squeezed my hand. "It doesn't. What happened today has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. Cancer didn't change who you are, Delilah. It revealed who they are. As if summoned by the universe's sense of timing, my phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe Robert had realized his mistake. Maybe he was coming back. Maybe this nightmare was over. But the message wasn't from Robert. It was from Patricia. We've arranged for a taxi to take you home when you're discharged. Don't expect us to keep enabling your attention-seeking behavior. It's time you learn to handle your medical drama yourself. Dr. Martinez read the message over my shoulder, and I watched her professional composure finally crack completely. This is unconscionable, she said, her voice shaking with anger. Absolutely unconscionable. She stood up abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where Robert's BMW still sat. Delilah, I need to ask you something important. Do you feel safe going home to that house? To that environment? The question hung in the air like a diagnosis I wasn't ready to hear. Safe? When had I stopped feeling safe in my own home? When had my husband's presence become a source of anxiety rather than comfort? When had fighting cancer become less frightening than facing the person who was supposed to help me fight it? I don't know, I admitted. I don't know anything anymore. Dr. Martinez turned back to me, her expression resolute. Then we're going to figure this out together. You have cancer, which means your only job right now is healing. Everything else, every person who makes that harder instead of easier, is secondary. She pulled out her tablet and began typing with the efficiency of someone making important decisions. I'm going to make some calls. There are resources for patients in situations like this, support systems that actually support instead of sabotage. You're not going home alone to face more of this. For the first time all day, I felt something besides fear and confusion. I felt hope. Not the naive hope I'd started with that morning, believing my husband would care for me through my treatment, but a different kind of hope, the hope that maybe, just maybe, being abandoned by people who'd proven themselves harmful might actually be the first step toward finding people who would prove themselves healing. Outside in the parking lot, Robert finally started his car and began the drive home to our empty house, still not understanding that he'd just made the most consequential decision of his life. He'd chosen his comfort over my survival, and everyone who mattered had witnessed that choice. Dr. Martinez was true to her word. Within 30 minutes of Robert's final abandonment, she had made 3 phone calls that would change the trajectory of my entire cancer journey. The first was to the hospital's social services department. The second was to a local organization that provided emergency housing for patients in crisis. And the third was to someone I'd never expected to hear from again. Delilah, Dr. Martinez said, returning to my bedside with a different energy. I've spoken with Sarah Williams from Patient Advocacy Services. She's coming down to talk with us about your options. I was still processing the text from Patricia, still trying to understand how asking for help during a medical emergency had somehow made me the villain in my own cancer story. Options for what? For safe housing during your treatment, Doctor. Martinez said simply. You don't have to go back to that house. You don't have to subject yourself to more of what happened today. Before I could respond, there was a gentle knock on the door. Sarah Williams was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the presence of someone who'd spent years helping people navigate their worst moments. Behind her was someone I hadn't seen in over a year, my college roommate, Kelly Thompson. Kelly? I whispered, hardly believing my eyes. What are you doing here? Kelly's face was streaked with tears as she approached my bed. Dr. Martinez called. Me. She said you needed someone who actually cares about you. She looked around the room as if expecting Robert to appear. Where is that bastard husband of yours? He left, I said, the words feeling surreal even as I spoke them. They all left. Kelly's expression went through several stages: confusion, disbelief, and finally, pure rage. He left you here? During chemo? After you almost had to be hospitalized? Sarah Williams stepped forward with the practiced calm of someone who'd dealt with family dysfunction in medical settings before. Delilah, I need to explain your options. First, you're not going anywhere tonight. Dr. Martinez wants to keep you for observation to make sure your electrolyte levels stabilize completely. But after that, Kelly said, squeezing my hand, you're coming home with me. I've already made up the guest room and stocked the kitchen with all those bland foods that actually stay down during chemo. The kindness was overwhelming. Here was someone I hadn't spoken to regularly in months, dropping everything to help me, in a way my own husband hadn't been willing to do. Kelly, I can't ask you to— You're not asking, Kelly interrupted firmly. I'm offering. Actually, I'm insisting. You're not going back to that toxic environment while you're fighting for your life. Sarah Williams opened a folder and pulled out several documents. There are also longer-term options we should discuss. The Cancer Center has partnerships with temporary housing programs, specifically for patients whose family situations become unsafe during treatment. There are support groups for people dealing with abandonment or abuse during serious illness. Abuse. The word hung in the air like a diagnosis I wasn't ready to accept. I don't think Robert was abusive, I said quietly. He was just overwhelmed. Dr. Martinez and Kelly exchanged a look that spoke volumes. It was Sarah who responded, her voice gentle but firm. Delilah, abandoning someone during a medical emergency isn't being overwhelmed. Planning to teach someone a lesson by leaving them without necessary medical support isn't stress management, and publicly accusing a cancer patient of weaponizing their illness? That's psychological abuse. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were wrong, but because they were right. For months, I'd been making excuses for Robert's behavior, telling myself that cancer was hard on spouses too, that I needed to be understanding of his struggles with my diagnosis. But sitting in that hospital bed, surrounded by people who'd known me for less than a day or hadn't seen me in over a year, all of whom had shown me more compassion than my husband had in months, the reality began to crystallize. This wasn't about Robert being overwhelmed by my cancer. This was about Robert being revealed by my cancer. Kelly pulled out her phone and showed me pictures of her guest room, bright and cheerful, with a comfortable bed and easy access to a bathroom. I've already talked to my boss about working from home for the next few weeks, so I can drive you to appointments. My neighbor is a nurse, and she's offered to help with any medical needs. But your life, I started. My life includes the people I care about, Kelly said simply. You helped me through my divorce 3 years ago, remember? You let me cry on your couch for months and never once made me feel like a burden. This is what friends do. Dr. Martinez checked her tablet and looked up with something resembling satisfaction. I've also documented everything that happened today. The medical neglect, the abandonment, the psychological abuse witnessed by multiple healthcare professionals and patients. If you decide to pursue legal separation or divorce, this documentation will be crucial. Divorce. Another word I wasn't ready to hear, but one that was beginning to feel less like failure and more like survival. There's something else, Sarah Williams said, her voice taking on a different tone. I've been in contact with several of the families who witnessed what happened in the lobby today. They want you to know that they're willing to provide character, testimony if needed. Cancer patients and their families who understand exactly what real medical crises look like. The community I'd lost when Robert's behavior drove away, our friends was being replaced by something I'd never expected. A network of people united by their understanding of what it meant to fight for your life, while others either helped or hindered that fight. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Robert. When are you coming home? I've been thinking about what happened today, and I think we need to talk. Kelly read the message over my shoulder, and her expression darkened. Too little? Too late? She muttered. Dr. Martinez looked at the message and then at me. How do you want to respond to that? For the first time in months, I felt like I actually had a choice. Not just about how to respond to a text message, but about how to respond to a relationship that had become more dangerous to my health than the cancer itself. "I don't want to respond at all," I said slowly. "At least not yet. I need time to think, time to heal, time to figure out who I am when I'm not constantly defending my right to be sick." Kelly grinned through her tears. "That's the Delilah Remember, the one who knows her own worth." Sarah Williams began gathering her papers. "I'll check on you tomorrow before your discharge. Kelly, Dr. Martinez has my contact information if any issues arise." As the room began to empty, leaving just Kelly and me, I realized something profound had happened. The abandonment that was supposed to teach me a lesson about consequences had indeed taught me something, but not what Robert intended. It had taught me the difference between people who love you and people who control you, between support systems that strengthen you and relationships that weaken you, between partners who stand with you during crisis and those who create additional crisis when you're already fighting for your life. "Kelly," I whispered as she adjusted my blankets, "thank you for saving me." "You saved yourself," she replied, quietly. "You just needed people who actually cared enough to help you do it." Outside, the sun was setting over a day that had changed everything. Robert was driving home to an empty house, probably already crafting the story he'd tell people about his unstable wife who'd had a breakdown at the cancer center. But for the first time in months, I wasn't going home to face his version of reality. I was going somewhere safe, somewhere healing, somewhere I could focus on the only battle that actually mattered, the one for my life. 3 weeks later, I woke up in Kelly's guest room to the sound of birds singing outside the window and the absence of anxiety in my chest. For the first time in months, my first thought upon waking wasn't about managing Robert's mood or minimizing my cancer symptoms to avoid his irritation. It was simply about whether I felt well enough to keep down breakfast. The transformation had been gradual but profound. Kelly's house operated on a completely different rhythm than the home I'd shared with Robert. Here, meals were planned around my treatment schedule and dietary restrictions. The thermostat was set for my comfort, not Robert's preferences. Most importantly, being sick was treated as a medical reality requiring care, not a personal failing requiring correction. "How are you feeling this morning?" Kelly asked, appearing in the doorway with a cup of ginger tea and a plate of plain toast cut into small triangles. She'd learned that smaller portions were less overwhelming when nausea was a constant companion. "Better," I said, and realized I actually meant it. "The anti-nausea medication Dr. Martinez adjusted seems to be working better." Kelly settled into the chair beside my bed, a routine we'd developed over the past weeks. She'd work from her laptop while I rested, available if I needed anything but not hovering or making me feel like a burden. It was a type of care I'd forgotten, existed, supportive without being suffocating, attentive without being controlling. "Your sister called this morning," Kelly said gently. "April wanted to check on you before your appointment today." My relationship with April had grown stronger since the pharmacy incident. She'd visited twice, bringing small gifts and sitting with me during the worst days of my treatment cycle. But more importantly, she'd validated what I'd experienced with Robert in a way that helped me stop questioning my own memories. "She's taking time off work to come to my scan next week," I told Kelly. "She wants to be there when we find out if the treatment is working. The CT scan would show whether the chemotherapy was shrinking my tumors or if we needed to consider different treatment options." In my old life with Robert, medical appointments had become sources of stress and conflict. He'd check his watch during doctor visits, interrupt conversations with questions about timeline and inconvenience, and minimize whatever results we received. But now I was building a different support network. Kelly would drive me to the appointment. April would hold my hand during difficult conversations. Dr. Martinez would explain results without worrying about a hostile family member undermining her recommendations. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert, the third one this week. Over the past 3 weeks, his messages had evolved from demands that I come home immediately to increasingly desperate attempts at reconciliation. This morning's message read, "Delilah, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I know I made mistakes. Can we please talk? I want to work this out." Kelly glanced at my phone screen. "How do you want to handle that?" "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to believe he's genuinely sorry, that maybe the shock of almost losing me made him realize how badly he'd been acting. Kelly's expression was carefully neutral. "What does your gut tell you?" My gut told me that Robert was sorry. Sorry that his abandonment had consequences he hadn't anticipated. Sorry that people had witnessed his behavior and formed opinions about his character. Sorry that his narrative about having an unstable, attention-seeking wife had been contradicted by medical professionals and multiple witnesses. But I wasn't sure he was sorry about the actual harm he'd caused me. "Sarah Williams is coming by this afternoon," Kelly reminded me. "She wanted to update you on some things." Sarah had become an unexpected anchor during this transition. She'd helped me understand my rights as a patient, connected me with resources I didn't know existed, and most importantly, helped me recognize patterns in Robert's behavior that I'd been too close to see clearly. The doorbell rang at exactly 2:00. Sarah's punctuality, one of many small reliabilities that had helped stabilize my world. She arrived carrying a folder thick with documents and wearing an expression that suggested significant developments. "How are you feeling, Delilah?" she asked, settling into our usual spots in Kelly's living room. "Stronger," I said, surprised by how true that felt. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally. Like I can think clearly for the first time in months. Sarah nodded with satisfaction. "That's exactly what I hope to hear. When you're not constantly managing someone else's emotional reactions to your illness, you have more energy for actual healing." She opened her folder and pulled out several documents. "I have some updates on various fronts. First, the Cancer Center has implemented new protocols for identifying and addressing family abuse of patients. Your case study, anonymized of course, is being used to train staff on warning signs. The idea that my experience might help other cancer patients avoid similar abandonment felt like something meaningful emerging from the trauma. Second," Sarah continued, "I've been in contact with an attorney who specializes in cases involving medical neglect and psychological abuse. If you decide to pursue legal separation or divorce, you have an extremely strong case." She showed me printouts of text messages, medical records, witness statements, and security footage, a comprehensive documentation of everything that had happened at the pharmacy and cancer center. "But most importantly," Sarah said, her voice taking on a different tone, "I need to tell you about a conversation I had yesterday with Dr. Martinez." She paused, studying my face carefully. "Your latest blood work shows something remarkable. Your tumor markers have dropped significantly since you started staying here with Kelly. More than Dr. Martinez expected given your treatment timeline." Kelly leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means that reducing stress and increasing genuine support has measurably improved Delilah's response to treatment," Sarah explained. "The body heals better when it's not constantly fighting psychological trauma alongside physical illness." The information hit me like a revelation. My cancer was responding better to treatment now that I wasn't living with Robert's emotional abuse. The man who'd claimed to be protecting me from my own dramatic tendencies had actually been undermining my ability to heal. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "Robert has been calling the cancer center trying to get information about your treatment. He's also contacted several of your former friends, apparently trying to build support for his version of what happened." Kelly's expression darkened. "What kind of support?" "He's telling people you had a mental breakdown triggered by cancer treatment, that you're staying with me because you're not thinking clearly, and that he's being unfairly vilified for trying to help you face reality about your condition." The manipulation was both predictable and infuriating. Even now, weeks later, Robert was still trying to control the narrative about my cancer experience. "How are people responding?" I asked. Sarah smiled for the first time during our conversation. Not the way he hoped. Apparently, several people remembered his behavior during your treatment. The complaints about inconvenience, the eye-rolling during conversations about your health, the way he'd minimize your symptoms. They're not buying his concerned husband act. The validation felt important, but not as crucial as it would have 3 weeks ago. I was building new sources of validation based on my actual experience rather than other people's opinions about my experience. "Sarah," I said quietly, "I think I'm ready to file for legal separation." Kelly reached over and squeezed my hand. Sarah nodded with professional satisfaction. "I think that's a very healthy decision," Sarah said. "And I think the timing is right. You're stable, you have support, and you're making decisions from a place of strength rather than crisis. For the first time since my cancer diagnosis, I felt like I was taking control of my life, rather than having life happen to me." The irony wasn't lost on me that the worst day of my treatment, being abandoned at a pharmacy during a medical emergency, had actually been the beginning of my real healing, not just from cancer, but from a relationship that had been slowly poisoning me long before any tumor appeared on my scans. 6 weeks after leaving Kelly's house to return to some semblance of independent living, I met Ian Foster in the most ordinary way possible. At the grocery store, reaching for the same box of ginger tea on a Tuesday afternoon. He was tall with gentle brown eyes and paint-stained fingers, and when he noticed my bald head covered by a colorful scarf, his expression didn't change to that familiar mixture of pity and discomfort I'd grown accustomed to seeing. "Sorry," he said with a genuine smile, gesturing to the tea. "You were here first." "It's okay," I replied, surprised by how normal the interaction felt. "There are plenty of boxes." "Good choice," he said, tapping his own box. "My sister swears by this stuff for morning sickness. Says it's the only thing that helped during her first trimester." The casual mention of someone else's nausea, without any awkward questions about why I might need anti-nausea tea, felt refreshing. Most people either avoided the topic entirely or asked invasive questions about my treatment. "It helps with chemo side effects too," I said, testing the waters of honesty. Ian nodded matter-of-factly. "My mom went through treatment 2 years ago. She became a ginger tea evangelist." He paused, studying my face with concern rather than curiosity. "How are you feeling?" The grocery store fluorescence can be brutal when you're dealing with treatment fatigue. The question was so thoughtful, so informed by actual understanding rather than empty politeness, that I found myself giving an honest answer instead of the usual, "Fine, thanks." "Actually, pretty good today," I said. "This is my first real grocery shopping trip in months. I'm staying in a little apartment near the cancer center now, trying to get back to normal life gradually." "That sounds like a smart approach," Ian said. "My mom tried to jump back into everything too quickly after her last round and ended up exhausted for weeks." We stood there for a moment in the tea aisle, two strangers connected by the shared experience of cancer touching our families. But, unlike conversations with Robert's family or even well-meaning friends, this felt easy and unforced. "I'm Ian, by the way," he said, extending his hand. "Delilah," I replied, shaking it and noticing again the paint stains. "Artist?" "Furniture restorer," he explained with a slight laugh. "I take things that are broken or forgotten and try to bring them back to life. It's surprisingly therapeutic work." Something about that description resonated deeply. That sounds like exactly the kind of work the world needs more of. Our conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing with a text from Dr. Martinez reminding me about my appointment the following day. Ian noticed me checking the time. "I should let you get back to your shopping," he said. "But if you don't mind me asking, and please feel free to tell me it's none of my business, do you have good support during your treatment?" I remember how important that was for my mom. The question was so direct and caring that it caught me off guard. In the 6 months since my diagnosis, very few people had asked about my support system. They'd asked about my prognosis, my treatment plan, my symptoms, but not about whether I felt cared for during the hardest experience of my life. "I do now," I said, thinking of Kelly, April, Dr. Martinez, Sarah Williams, and the small but growing network of people who'd proven themselves trustworthy. It took a while to find the right people, but I do. Ian's expression suggested he understood there was a story behind that answer, but he didn't pry. That's really important. If you ever need someone to help with errands or just need company, during the boring parts of recovery, I'd be happy to help. I know how isolating treatment can be. He pulled out his phone and offered it to me. "No pressure at all, but if you'd like another person in your support network, I'm pretty good at grocery shopping and terrible at small talk, which my mom said was actually perfect for chemo days." I found myself smiling as I entered my number into his phone. Terrible small talk sounds wonderful, actually. I'm so tired of people asking how I'm feeling or telling me to stay positive. "Never once," Ian promised with mock seriousness. "I'll stick to safe topics like furniture restoration techniques and whatever random documentary I watched the night before." 3 days later, Ian texted to ask if I needed anything from the store before my next treatment. It was such a simple offer, but it represented something I'd been missing throughout my cancer journey. Practical help offered without expectation or drama. Over the following weeks, our friendship developed at the gentle pace that serious illness requires. Ian would stop by with groceries or a book he thought I might enjoy. He'd sit with me during the worst days after chemo, not trying to cheer me up or minimize my discomfort, just being present while I rested. Most importantly, he never made my cancer about him. He didn't need reassurance that I would be okay. Didn't require me to manage his emotions about my illness. Didn't treat my diagnosis as an inconvenience to his plans. He simply accepted that I was fighting something difficult and offered to help in whatever way was useful. "You know what I like about you?" I told him one afternoon as we sat in my living room, him working on sketches for a restoration project, while I dozed on the couch. "My devastating wit?" he suggested without looking up from his drawings. "You treat cancer like it's just another thing that happened to me. Not the only thing that defines me." Ian set down his pencil and looked at me thoughtfully. "That's because it is just another thing that happened to you. A big, difficult, life-changing thing, but still just one part of your story." The conversation reminded me of something Dr. Martinez had said weeks earlier about relationships that helped healing versus relationships that hindered it. Ian's presence in my life felt healing in ways I was still discovering. "Can I ask you something?" I said during one of our grocery store trips, which had become a weekly routine. "Always. Why are you so good at this? At being around someone with cancer without making it weird or stressful?" Ian was quiet for a moment, considering his answer as we navigated around other shoppers. I watched my mom go through treatment, and I saw how differently people treated her afterward. Some people acted like she was fragile and might break. Others acted like cancer was contagious and kept their distance. A few people acted like she should be grateful for the experience because it put things in perspective. He shook his head. But the people who helped her the most were the ones who just treated her like herself. Someone going through a hard time who needed practical support and normal friendship, not pity or inspiration or careful handling. "What happened to your mom?" I asked gently. "She's doing great," Ian said with a genuine smile. 2 years clear, back to terrorizing the neighborhood association about proper lawn maintenance and lecturing everyone about the benefits of ginger tea. The relief in his voice was palpable, and I realized that Ian understood not just the patient experience of cancer, but the family experience of watching someone you love fight for their life. He'd learned how to be helpful without being overwhelming, supportive without being suffocating. "I'm glad she's okay," I said. "I'm glad you're getting better too," Ian replied simply. "And I'm glad you ended up reaching for ginger tea at the same time I did." As we finished our shopping, I reflected on how different this relationship felt from anything I'd experienced during my marriage to Robert. There was no scorekeeping, no resentment about inconvenience, no expectation that I should be grateful. For basic human decency, Ian was showing me what healthy support looked like, offered freely, without strings attached, based on genuine care rather than obligation or control. For the first time since my diagnosis, I was beginning to imagine what life might look like on the other side of treatment. Not just survival, but actually living again. 3 months into my friendship with Ian, I faced the conversation I'd been both anticipating and dreading. It was a Thursday evening in November, and I was sitting in my small apartment feeling the familiar pre-chemo anxiety that came before each treatment cycle. But this time, there was an additional layer of nervousness. I was finally ready to tell Ian the full story of what had happened with Robert. He arrived at 7 o'clock with takeout, from the Thai place that had become our regular spot, the one that made mild dishes that were gentle on my treatment-sensitive stomach. As he unpacked the containers, I noticed him glancing at me with the careful attention he'd developed for reading my moods. "You seem different tonight," he said, not prying but leaving space for me to share if I wanted to. "I've been thinking about something," I said, pushing rice around my plate. "About trust and timing, and when you tell someone the really hard parts of your story." Ian set down his chopsticks and gave me his full attention. "Okay. I want to tell you about my husband," I said. "My ex-husband, technically. And about why I was living alone when we met, and why I sometimes flinch when people raise their voices, and why I'm so grateful for the way you treat my cancer. Like it's just another fact about me instead of a tragedy or an inconvenience." Ian's expression didn't change, but I saw something shift in his eyes, a recognition that whatever I was about to share would be significant. "I'd like to hear whatever you want to tell me." So I told him everything. About Robert's escalating irritation with my diagnosis, the way he'd begun treating my symptoms as personal affronts, the gradual isolation from friends and family that I'd thought was just the natural result of having cancer. I told him about the pharmacy incident, the abandonment, the humiliation in the cancer center lobby. "He left you at a pharmacy during chemo?" Ian's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the anger underneath. "Twice, actually," I said. "Once at the pharmacy, then again at the cancer center after my medical team came to get me. His mother and sister were there for the second abandonment." Ian was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd shared. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "That wasn't about cancer being hard on relationships. That was abuse." "I know that now," I said. "It took me a while to see it clearly. When you're in the middle of it, especially when you're already sick and vulnerable, it's hard to trust your own perceptions." "How are you now?" Ian asked. "I mean, I know you're dealing with treatment and recovery, but how are you emotionally? Psychologically?" The question was exactly what I'd hoped he'd ask. Not whether I was over it or whether I'd moved on, but how I was actually doing with the ongoing process of healing from both cancer and psychological trauma. "Better," I said honestly. "Some days I feel angry about the time I lost being afraid in my own marriage instead of focusing on fighting cancer. Other days I feel grateful that the worst experience of my life led me to find out who really cares about me." Ian nodded thoughtfully. "It makes sense that you'd have complicated feelings about all of it." "The strangest part," I continued, "is that my cancer treatment is actually going better now than it was when I was married. My oncologist says stress can interfere with healing, and apparently being constantly anxious about my husband's reactions to my illness was causing more problems. Then the chemotherapy. That's not strange at all," Ian said. "My mom's doctors told her the same thing, that emotional support during treatment isn't just nice to have, it's medically important." I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Ian's response was exactly what I'd needed. Validation without drama, understanding without excessive emotion, acceptance of my experience without trying to fix or minimize it. "Can I ask you something?" Ian said after we'd eaten in comfortable silence for a while. "Always." Are you nervous about telling me this because you think it changes how I see you? Or because you're worried about how I'll react? The question was so perceptive it caught me off guard. Both, I think. Cancer already makes people see you differently. Adding abandoned by spouse during medical emergency to the story feels like a lot for anyone to handle. Ian considered this carefully. You know what I see when I look at you? Someone who survived not one but two life-threatening situations, cancer and an abusive marriage. Someone who had the strength to leave a harmful situation even when she was already fighting for her life. Someone who's rebuilt her support system from scratch and is getting healthier every day. Tears started flowing before I could stop them. I don't feel strong most of the time. Strength isn't about feeling strong, Ian said quietly. It's about doing what you need to do even when you feel weak, scared, or uncertain. You've been doing that for months. He handed me a tissue and waited while I composed myself. Is there anything specific you need from me? Any way I can be more helpful or supportive given what you've shared? The question was so practical and caring that it made me cry harder. Robert had never asked how he could better support me during treatment. He'd only complained about how my needs inconvenienced him. Just keep being yourself, I said. Keep treating me like a person instead of a patient or a victim. Keep offering help without making me feel guilty for needing it. That's easy, Ian said with a smile. You're one of the most interesting people I know. Cancer is just one thing about you, and your ex-husband's behavior says nothing about who you are. As the evening continued, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't experienced in over a year. The relief of being fully known and still accepted was overwhelming. Ian didn't treat me differently after learning about the abuse, didn't become overly protective or careful with his words, didn't make my trauma the center of our friendship. There's something else, I said, as he was getting ready to leave. I'm planning to be done with active treatment in 2 months. Dr. Martinez thinks the cancer is responding well enough that we can move to maintenance therapy rather than continuing with full chemotherapy. Ian's face lit up with genuine joy. That's amazing news. How do you feel about it? Excited, scared, ready. I paused, trying to find the right words. For the first time since my diagnosis, I'm looking forward to the future instead of just trying to survive the present. What does the future look like? Ian asked. I don't know exactly, I admitted. But I know it includes people who actually care about my well-being. People who show up when things get difficult instead of creating additional difficulties. People like you. Ian smiled and squeezed my hand gently. I'm honored to be part of whatever comes next. As he left that evening, I realized that sharing my story with Ian had been a kind of test. Not of him, but of myself. A test of whether I could be vulnerable with someone new, whether I could trust my own judgment about people, whether I was healing not just physically but emotionally. The answer to all of those questions was yes. For the first time in over a year, I felt like myself again. Not just the cancer patient or the abuse survivor, but Delilah. Someone worthy of love and support. Someone capable of building healthy relationships. Someone with a future that extended beyond mere survival. The healing process, I was learning, wasn't just about getting cancer-free. It was about becoming free from all the things that had been slowly killing me, including the relationship that had been poisoning my life long before any tumor appeared. 8 months after the pharmacy incident, I was finally feeling like a person again, rather than just a cancer patient. My hair had grown back in soft waves, my energy was returning, and I'd just received clearance from Dr. Martinez to reduce my follow-up appointments from monthly to quarterly. I was celebrating this milestone by doing something completely ordinary, grocery shopping with Ian on a Saturday afternoon at Riverside Market, the upscale store I'd avoided for months because it was where Robert and I used to shop together. Are you sure you want to go there? Ian had asked when I suggested it. We could stick with our usual place. No, I'd said firmly. I'm tired of letting my past dictate which grocery stores I can use. Besides, they have that artisan bread you like. I was reaching for organic apples in the produce section, laughing at something Ian had said about his latest furniture restoration disaster, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Delilah? I turned around and found myself face to face with Robert for the first time since that horrible day at the cancer center. He looked older, I noticed immediately. Thinner. There were new lines around his eyes and gray threading through his hair that hadn't been there 8 months ago. But what struck me most was his expression, a mixture of shock, guilt, and something that looked almost like relief. Robert, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Hello? Ian, who had been examining avocados nearby, moved closer without making a show of it. He didn't know what Robert looked like, but he'd obviously picked up on the tension in my voice. You look... Robert started, then stopped, clearly struggling for words. You look healthy. Your hair grew back beautifully. The comment was so absurdly normal given our history that I almost laughed. We were standing in the produce section making small talk about my post-chemo hair growth as if we were acquaintances who'd run into each other at a coffee shop. Thank you, I said simply. Robert's eyes shifted to Ian, who was standing close enough to offer support, but far enough away to give me space to handle the conversation however I needed to. I'm Robert, he said, extending his hand. Delilah's former husband. Ian replied, shaking his hand with polite neutrality. His tone carried no judgment, but also no warmth. It was the voice of someone being civil while silently assessing a situation. I've been hoping to run into you, Robert said, turning back to me. I mean, not hoping exactly, but I've wanted to talk to you, to explain, to apologize. The words I'd imagined hearing for months now felt strangely anticlimactic. Okay, I said. Robert glanced around the busy produce section, clearly realizing this wasn't the ideal place for whatever conversation he'd imagined having. Would you be willing to talk somewhere more private? Maybe get coffee? Looked at Ian, who gave me the slightest nod, not encouraging me one way or another, just letting me know he'd support whatever I decided. We can talk here, I said. Whatever you need to say, you can say it here. Robert's face fell slightly. He'd clearly been hoping for a longer, more intimate conversation, the kind where he could deploy the full force of his charm and persuasion. A public produce section didn't offer him those advantages. I was wrong, he began, his voice dropping lower. About everything. The way I treated you during your treatment, the things I said at the cancer center, abandoning you at the pharmacy. I was completely wrong, and I'm so sorry. The apology sounded rehearsed, like something he'd practiced in front of a mirror. But there was genuine emotion behind it, regret, shame, maybe even grief. I appreciate you saying that, I replied carefully. I've been in therapy, Robert continued, apparently taking my response as encouragement. Trying to understand why I reacted so badly to your diagnosis. My therapist says I have issues with control and fear of abandonment that got triggered when you got sick. The psychological language felt familiar. The same kind of clinical explanations Robert had always used to intellectualize his behavior rather than taking genuine responsibility for it. That must have been helpful for you. To learn, I said. It has been. I understand now that I was projecting my own fears onto you. When you got cancer, I was terrified of losing you. But instead of dealing with that fear in healthy ways, He paused, clearly struggling with the words. I pushed you away first, to protect myself from the pain of potentially losing you. Ian shifted slightly beside me, and I could sense his growing discomfort with Robert's explanation. It was the kind of psychological justification that sounded insightful, but actually avoided taking responsibility for causing harm. Robert, I said quietly. Cancer didn't make you abandon me at a pharmacy. Fear of loss didn't make you accuse me of weaponizing my illness for attention. Those were choices you made. His face crumpled slightly. I know. I know they were choices and they were wrong choices. I'm not trying to excuse what I did. I'm trying to explain it so you'll understand that I'm different now. Different how? I asked. I understand what love really means now, what it means to support someone unconditionally. I know I failed you when you needed me most, but I've learned from that failure. I want to show you that I can be the husband you deserved during your treatment. The word husband hung in the air like a challenge. Robert was clearly hoping for reconciliation, for a chance to prove that therapy had transformed him into the partner he should have been during my cancer journey. Robert, I said gently but firmly, I'm glad you're in therapy. I'm glad you're learning about yourself. But I'm not interested in finding out whether you've changed. His face went white. What do you mean? I mean that I've built a life without you. A good life, with people who showed up for me when I needed them most. People who didn't need a cancer diagnosis to teach them how to treat me with basic human decency. I glanced at Ian, who was watching our exchange with the quiet intensity of someone ready to intervene if needed, but respecting my ability to handle the situation. I'm happy, I continued. Genuinely happy, probably for the first time in years. And that happiness isn't something I'm willing to risk on the possibility that you might have learned to be a better person. Robert's expression cycled through several emotions: disbelief, anger, and finally, something that looked like acceptance. Is it him? He asked, nodding toward Ian. Are you together? That's not really your business anymore, I said. But no, Ian is my friend. Someone who's been incredibly supportive during my recovery. Recovery from cancer or recovery from me? Robert asked. And for the first time in our conversation, he sounded genuinely curious rather than defensive. Both, I said honestly. Robert was quiet for a long moment, apparently processing the reality that I wasn't just angry with him, I was done with him. That his apology and promises of change weren't going to restore what he'd destroyed. I lost you, he said finally, and his voice held a kind of wonder, as if he was only now understanding the full consequences of his actions. No, I corrected, gently. You threw me away. There's a difference. As we walked away from that encounter, Ian was quiet until we reached his car. Then he turned to me with an expression of amazement. You were incredible, he said. The way you handled that conversation, so clear, so strong, but not cruel. I don't think I could have been that gracious to someone who'd hurt me that badly. A year ago, I couldn't have been either, I admitted. But I've learned that holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts him. I can be done with someone without hating them. As we drove home, I reflected on how different that encounter had felt from what I'd imagined. I'd expected to feel angry, or sad, or vindicated. Instead, I felt something I hadn't anticipated: complete indifference. Robert had become a stranger to me, someone from my past who no longer had the power to affect my present or future. The man who'd once been able to ruin my day with a disapproving look now felt like just another person at the grocery store. That, I realized, was what real healing looked like. 3 days after my encounter with Robert at the grocery store, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Gil, the elderly man whose wife Kelly had helped me at Henderson's pharmacy that first terrible day. His voice carried an urgency that immediately caught my attention. Delilah, I hope you don't mind me calling. April from the pharmacy gave me your number. There's something you need to know about your ex-husband. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Kelly and I have been volunteering at the cancer center since her treatment ended, Gil explained. We help with patient advocacy and support services. Yesterday, we overheard something that concerns you directly. He paused, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. Robert has been making phone calls to the cancer center, to other patients' families, even to some of the staff. He's been telling people a very different version of what happened to you. I sank into my kitchen chair, feeling the familiar anxiety creep back into my chest. What kind of version? He's claiming that you had a psychological breakdown during treatment, that you became delusional and paranoid, and that he had to leave you for his own safety, Gil said, his voice heavy with disgust. He's telling people that the cancer center staff enabled your mental health crisis instead of getting you proper psychiatric help. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Robert wasn't just rewriting history. He was actively trying to destroy my credibility with the very people who had witnessed his abandonment and abuse. There's more, Gil continued. He's been contacting families who were in the lobby that day, trying to convince them that what they saw wasn't what actually happened. He's claiming that you coached people to lie about his behavior. My hands started shaking. Even 8 months later, even after building a new life, Robert was still trying to control the narrative about my cancer experience. Who's believing him? I asked quietly. Almost no one, Gil said firmly. The families who witnessed what happened that day remember it clearly. The cancer center staff have documented evidence of everything. But Delilah, he's not giving up. He seems determined to convince someone, anyone, that you're the unstable one in this story, Dr. Martinez called an hour later, her voice tight with professional anger. Delilah, I need to inform you that Robert has been attempting to access your medical records through various channels. He's claiming spousal privilege, even though your divorce was finalized months ago. Can he do that? I asked. Absolutely not. Your medical information is protected and he has no legal right to access it. But his attempts are concerning because they suggest he's building some kind of case against you. Sarah Williams arrived at my apartment that evening with a folder thick with new documentation. We need to talk about a pattern that's emerging, she said, settling into my living room with the serious expression I'd come to associate with significant developments. Robert has been more active than we realized, she began. He's contacted your former friends, your old neighbors, even some of your colleagues. He's been systematically trying to build support for a narrative that paints you as mentally unstable, and him as a victim of your manipulation. She opened her folder and showed me printouts of social media posts, email screenshots, and witness statements. But here's what he didn't anticipate. People have been forwarding his messages to us. His attempts at manipulation are creating their own evidence trail. The documentation was extensive. Screenshots of Facebook messages where Robert claimed I'd weaponized cancer for attention. Emails to former neighbors describing my increasingly erratic behavior during treatment. Text messages to mutual acquaintances warning them that I was spreading lies about him. The good news, Sarah continued, is that his own words are proving our case better than anything we could have compiled ourselves. Every time he tries to convince someone that you're unstable, he's actually demonstrating his own manipulative behavior. Ian arrived as Sarah was leaving, carrying dinner and immediately sensing the tension in the room. What's happened? He asked, setting down the food and focusing entirely on my face. I explained Robert's campaign of manipulation, his attempts to rewrite history, his systematic effort to undermine my credibility with anyone who might support me. He's still trying to control you, Ian said quietly. Even after losing you, even after the divorce, he can't accept that his actions had consequences. What I don't understand, I said, is what he hopes to accomplish. Even if he convinced people I was unstable, what would that get him? Sarah, who had been listening from the doorway, answered, Control. If he can convince enough people that you're mentally ill, that your version of events is unreliable, then he can restore his reputation. He can go back to being the long-suffering husband who tried to help his unstable wife instead of the man who abandoned a cancer patient during a medical emergency. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Robert wasn't just trying to rewrite the past. He was trying to steal my future. If he succeeded in convincing people I was mentally unstable, it would affect my relationships, my career, my credibility in any future situation where I might need to be believed. But as I looked around my apartment at the evidence of the life I'd built, Ian's patient presence, Sarah's professional advocacy, the stack of supportive cards from cancer center families, I realized something important. Robert's desperate campaign to discredit me was actually proving the opposite of what he intended. His behavior was so extreme, so persistent, so clearly manipulative that it was exposing his true character to anyone paying attention. The truth, it seemed, was still finding its way to the surface, carried not by Robert's lies, but by his own compulsive need to control a narrative that had already escaped his grasp. The reckoning came in the most unexpected way possible, through a viral social media post that Robert had never intended to make public. It was 3 weeks after we learned about his manipulation campaign, and I was having lunch with Ian and Kelly at a small cafe near the cancer center when my phone exploded with notifications. "Delilah," Kelly said, looking at her own phone with amazement, "you need to see this." What I saw was a screenshot of a private Facebook message that Robert had sent to one of our former mutual friends, except it had accidentally been posted as a public status update instead. The post contained everything: his detailed plan to discredit me, his admission that he'd abandoned me during chemo because I was inconvenient, and most damaging of all, his explicit strategy for convincing people I was mentally unstable. The post read, "I need to make sure everyone understands that Delilah's version of what happened during her cancer treatment isn't reliable. She's been spreading lies about me abandoning her at a pharmacy, but the truth is, she had a complete psychological breakdown, and I had to protect myself. I've been working systematically to contact everyone who might believe her story and set the record straight. The cancer center staff enabled her delusions instead of getting her proper psychiatric help. If anyone asks about our divorce, please remember that she weaponized her illness to manipulate everyone around her. I just need enough people to understand that she's not mentally stable, so I can rebuild my reputation." Within hours, the post had been shared hundreds of times. Cancer patients, advocates, and medical professionals were responding with outrage and disbelief. Dr. Martinez called me within 30 minutes of the post going viral. "Delilah," she said, her voice shaking with anger, "I need your permission to respond publicly to this. As your oncologist, I can confirm that what he's claiming is medically and factually false." "You have my permission," I said without hesitation. Dr. Martinez's response, posted an hour later, was devastating in its clinical precision. "As an oncologist, with 20 years of experience, I feel compelled to address the dangerous misinformation being spread about one of my patients. Abandoning a chemotherapy patient during a medical emergency is not protecting oneself, it's medical neglect. Accusing cancer patients of weaponizing their illness is psychological abuse. The behavior described in this post represents a textbook case of spousal abuse during serious illness, documented by multiple medical professionals and witnessed by numerous families. The responses to Dr. Martinez's post came flooding in. Other cancer patients shared their own stories of family abandonment. During treatment, medical professionals weighed in about the psychological impact of spousal abuse on cancer outcomes. The families who had witnessed Robert's behavior in the cancer center lobby posted their own accounts, corroborating every detail of what had actually happened. But the most powerful response came from an unexpected source: Patricia, Robert's own mother. Her post appeared the next morning. "I need to publicly apologize to my former daughter-in-law. I participated in the emotional abuse of a cancer patient because I was more concerned with protecting my son's image than acknowledging his harmful behavior. What we did to Delilah was unconscionable, and I take full responsibility for my part in it. No one should have to fight cancer while also fighting the people who are supposed to love them." The public nature of the exposure changed everything. Robert's carefully constructed narrative collapsed under the weight of documented evidence and witness testimony. His employer, a prestigious law firm, quietly asked for his resignation after clients began expressing concerns about his character. Esther, his sister, posted her own apology and announced she was entering therapy to understand how she'd participated in the abuse. Ian found me crying in my apartment that evening, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of vindication, of justice finally being served, of truth finally being louder than lies. "How do you feel?" he asked, sitting beside me on the couch. "Free," I said simply. "For the first time since my diagnosis, I feel completely free." The viral post had accomplished something that months of legal documentation couldn't. It had exposed Robert's true character to everyone he'd been trying to impress. His own words had become the evidence of his manipulation and cruelty. But more importantly, it had created a public record that would protect other cancer patients from similar abuse. Medical professionals were already using the case as a teaching tool about family dynamics during serious illness. Patient advocacy groups were developing new protocols for identifying and addressing spousal abandonment during treatment. Robert's attempt to destroy my credibility had backfired spectacularly, creating instead a permanent public record of his own manipulative behavior. The man who had spent months trying to convince people I was mentally unstable had proven, in his own words, that he was the one whose judgment couldn't be trusted. Justice, it turned out, sometimes came not through courts or legal proceedings, but through someone's own compulsive need to control a narrative that was bigger than they were. Robert had tried to rewrite history and ended up creating the most damning evidence against himself possible. The truth, as I'd learned over and over, again, really did have its own timeline, and when it finally arrived, it was more powerful than any lie. 1 year after the viral post that exposed Robert's manipulation campaign, I stood in the conference room at Riverside Cancer Center, delivering the opening remarks for the first annual Patient Advocacy Symposium. The room was filled with oncologists, nurses, social workers, and cancer survivors, people united by their commitment to ensuring that no patient would have to endure what I had experienced. "A year and a half ago," I began, my voice steady and clear, "I was abandoned at a pharmacy during chemotherapy treatment by the person who was supposed to love me most. Today, I'm here not as a victim of that abandonment, but as someone who learned that being thrown away by the wrong person can lead you to find the right ones." In the front row sat my new support network. Ian, now officially my partner after a relationship that had developed as naturally as breathing. Kelly Thompson, who had become like a sister. Dr. Martinez, who had fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. And Sarah Williams, who had helped me understand that healing meant more than just surviving cancer. The symposium was the culmination of 18 months of work that had grown out of the documentation of my case. Medical professionals had used my experience to develop new protocols for identifying family dysfunction during cancer treatment. Patient advocates had created support networks for people facing abandonment during serious illness. Legal experts had established new frameworks for protecting patients from medical neglect by family members. The most dangerous myth in cancer care, I continued, is that family always equals support. Sometimes the people closest to us are the least equipped to handle our vulnerability. Sometimes love looks like abandonment, and sometimes strangers show us more compassion than spouses. After my presentation, I was approached by dozens of people, cancer patients who had experienced similar abandonment, family members who recognized toxic patterns in their own relationships, medical professionals who wanted to better support patients in crisis. But the most meaningful conversation came from a young woman named Emma, who was halfway through treatment for breast cancer. "My husband keeps telling me I'm being dramatic about my side effects," she said quietly. "After hearing your story, I think I need to get help." Sarah Williams, who had been listening nearby, immediately stepped forward with resources and contact information. This was how change happened. One conversation at a time, one person finding the courage to ask for help, one support system being built to replace a harmful one. That evening, Ian and I walked through Riverside Park, the same park where I'd once been afraid to encounter Robert by accident. Now it was just a beautiful place where we could enjoy each other's company without fear or anxiety. "Do you ever think about him?" Ian asked as we sat on a bench overlooking the duck pond. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not the way I used to. I think about him the way I think about the cancer. Something difficult that happened to me. Something that taught me important things about myself, but not something that defines who I am anymore." Robert had become a cautionary tale in my life, rather than an ongoing source of pain. The man who had once had the power to ruin my day with a disapproving look was now just a character in a story about how I'd learned to recognize love from those who didn't weaponize my vulnerability against me. "I'm proud of how you've transformed something so traumatic into something that helps other people," Ian said. "I had good teachers," I replied, squeezing his hand. "You, Kelly, Dr. Martinez, Sarah, all of you showed me what actual support looks like. How to help someone without requiring them to be grateful. How to love someone without needing to control them." As we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I realized that this was what healing looked like. Not the absence of difficult memories, but the presence of people who made those memories feel manageable. Not the erasure of trauma, but the creation of meaning from suffering. The Cancer Center had asked me to become a permanent patient advocate, helping other patients navigate family crises during treatment. Ian and I were planning to move in together, a decision that felt exciting rather than terrifying, because it was based on mutual support rather than control or obligation. Most importantly, I had learned the difference between surviving and thriving. Surviving was getting through chemotherapy despite Robert's abandonment. Thriving was building a life so full of genuine love and support that his absence felt like a gift rather than a loss. The girl who had once believed that any love was better, then no love had learned that the wrong love was actually much worse than solitude. And the woman who had emerged from that learning was someone I was proud to be. Strong not because I had endured suffering, but because I had refused to accept suffering as the price of love. As Ian and I walked home through the gathering darkness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with my life as it was, and genuine excitement about what it might become. The future was no longer something to survive, but something to embrace with the people who had proven themselves worthy of the gift of loving me. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the thing that saves you. Robert's abandonment had been the worst thing until it became the thing that led me to discover what real love actually looked like. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.